All right, afternoon everyone. Firstly, thank you guys for, one, to chat on it, for providing a space for creatives to share their journey, share their stories. Secondly, thank you to everyone coming out. People I don't know in the front row, people in the back, Jabari in the back. All right, so without further ado, welcome to my talk, Art, Design, and Mental Health. And it's pretty much a conversation that I had during the pandemic with myself, my inner critic, because I had gotten to a point in life where I didn't want to be a creative anymore. And before I got to that point, I know I had to do some work. And that work kind of helped me get to a point in life now where I'm able to kind of define my own personal brand. So, next slide. Terrell George. And I always remember this story. I was either like about 5 or 6. I want to make my own glasses. And found some shards of glass, some wires that we had, and stood right on the top step and made my own pair of glasses. And I didn't care if it worked or not. I just had that thing for me. And I've always kept that story and that moment in terms of that little bit of ignorance, where they say ignorance is bliss, and not worrying about the rules or why or the outcome. But I've kept that throughout my life in terms of just doing the thing, not worrying about all those other things, just making it an overall, just making me happy in that moment. Next slide. So my journey, which I call the sacred timeline. So as I mentioned, I was just generally a creative child. Through primary school, the primary school I had went to Scarborough RC, they believed in both academics and extracurricular activities where you had to be involved in something. So your boy was in music, he was doing public speaking, he was dancing, he was drawing, every single thing, plus the academics was also important. Eventually got to high school. I kind of call that period a blip because, granted, I'm proud of the high school I went to, but it was heavily focused on academics and the art program wasn't the best. So that timeline of being an artist, eventually by the time I graduated, I wasn't doing much as a creative. However, in the last 2 years of high school, again, that curiosity, saw some friends of mine creating some cool graphics with their names, to create some cool banners for Facebook and I think High Five around that time. And me being curious, I was like, I want to make something cool like that as well too. So I asked one of my friends, I was like, hey, can I get a copy of the software that you use? He was a little bit hesitant, but I keep pushing. Eventually I got a copy of, this would have been Photoshop CS 3 or 4, I think at that time. And again, just like with the glasses, started playing around, looking at tutorials, not necessarily thinking of an end goal of, hey, I want to be a graphic designer, or I have this particular goal I want to reach, I want to fly out and do all these cool branding projects and all these kind of things. But again, I just wanted to make cool shit to make it happy for me. And this is where this branch timeline started to come. What I call the graphic designer. And we can skip to the next one. So from 2012 to present day, I did not expect to work on some of the things that I have worked on, honestly. And throughout my career, I've been able to work on some amazing projects, specifically government, in the public sector. I'm one of those weird designers who actually enjoy working in the public sector. But it allowed me the opportunity to put my own personal mark on things on a national level. And in me, I've always wanted to see what these different festivals could look with my eye or my touch. So I think one of the pivotal points of my design career was when I was the graphic designer at Tobago festivals, where I was given the opportunity to really shape each individual festival. So as you see, Blue Food Festival, the Tobago Jazz, Tobago Heritage, and even outside of festival, I got the opportunity to develop the identity for the iconic store bay. And then now, present day, where I'm at, almost like an independent contractor with Tourism Trinidad, which kind of happened last year. And that one, I think, was the last thing for me personally that eventually when I started to understand the field of graphic design, what I wanted to do with certain goals, this was one of the things that I had listed where I wanted to work with a national tourism board, whether it was Tobago or Trinidad. So happened Trinidad came knocking first. And this graphic at the bottom here, this was one of the first projects that I had to tackle, which was Carnival last year, which was the mother of Carnival, I think it was. This was when everybody was coming back out. So me sweating bullets, no pressure. It's Carnival, it's gonna be all outside the place. And my friends will know, when it comes to my work, I don't like to talk about my work. If I see it out in the wild, I would fold up like a ball and cringe. But for Carnival, it was everywhere. It was in the airport, it was in the magazines, it was printed on banners. I remember going to Pan on the Greens and there was this big banner just watching me in my face. I was like, you know what? I ready to go back home. But later into the presentation, that was just the imposter syndrome starting to seep into come into play. Next slide.
Did you ever see something you created and think, hey, that real nice, and then say, oh my God, that's mine?
I did secretly, but at the same time, I didn't verbally say it because I always feel weird saying that. It is. And I started in recent times because I get booked from a therapist to start giving myself a little bit of grace and just kind of accept the wins. Because like with me, I never like celebrating wins per se, but as I will discuss further down, anxiety, imposter syndrome, and all these kind of things, it really robbed me from a lot. And like I was explaining to some friends of mine before we started, where with everything happening, all these things that I would have accomplished and done, I felt like I was in the backseat of it. And that persona that was created and who was at the forefront, he was driving the wheel. So it was just like on to the next, on to the next, on to the next. And I am trying to retreat, but life is just like pulling me into situations, case in point, this presentation, where I have to be present and actually show up and talk about the work. So yeah, but just kind of going back with this, while also working on those national projects, those were more so like day job stuff. I was also working on my own personal business, Cobalt Blue, which was my own personal design agency, where I started to kind of create some of the stuff that I like doing and I had more control. Control is another big thing in my life, where I wanted my own creative domain to create things that I work on projects that I wanted to do. So that led me into starting Cobalt Blue, where I work with primarily creative professionals and SMEs to help them develop their visual identities. This was started in 2016, and so I was still working my day job, I was still building Cobalt Blue at the same time. Next slide. So back to the timeline. Curiosity peaked again, and just kind of taking it back to 2012, when I had started my first job as an OJT in the comms unit of TRHA. Photography wasn't necessarily on my radar. If we had disposable cameras home, I used to like take pictures and all this kind of thing, but I had no intentions of it becoming a profession. And curiosities, again, so the department photographer, she had a Nikon D90. And I was passing on her desk and I was like, ooh, first time seeing a DSLR in person. I was like, I could just pick it up and just like play with it or whatever. She was like, yeah, if you want to just shoot a couple of things, you could tag along to like some of the activations and stuff that we're doing. And I was like, cool, no scene. And then because I was working on brochures and things for the department, I was like, okay, there are things that I'm starting to see that I personally want to shoot that I want to include in my brochure. So I started taking the department camera, that's in the 90, but we also had I can't remember what they call it, but one of those really fancy cool pics that looked like a DSLR, but it was still like a point and shoot. I started using that, and the acting manager at the time, she was like, hey, UE is having their photography course cycle coming up again. Do you want to go and do it? I was like, yeah, cool, no scene. So did that course, and that kind of gave me some confidence to actually use the department DSLR now, because I know, probably don't know to kind of shoot on manual now. I wasn't shooting automatic anymore again, so I had that kind of knowledge. And because my family was seeing I was getting involved in another creative outlet, because they fed up on me, because they hated to see in primary school me coming home with a white paper with some activity happening. I was like, where are you going to start now? So eventually they saw me getting into photography and they gifted me my first DSLR, which was Canon T3i, which would always be a favorite in my eye. Next slide. So while I was doing stuff for the department, for my own personal projects, I wanted to be a little bit more expressive with the stuff that I was doing and focusing less on coverage work. And photography kind of provided an outlet for me to let the artist run free again, because he didn't have that outlet. At that time, I didn't see that through graphic design. Graphic design wasn't like an art form for me. It was the entire solution to a goal and problem solving. And with this now, I started to use this as a platform to create again. So for whatever reason in the beginning, I was just obsessed with black and white. And most of my shots were done in black and white. All on that Canon T3i and the kit lens that came with it. Because at that time, mans didn't realize how expensive glass was. And I was like, you know what? I would make my T3i and my 18-35 work it, and then what skills I know as a graphic designer to edit would compensate for the things that I didn't know. I could pause to talk about this second image with the three faces on top. Again, I have to tell my friends in the beginning who kind of were like my muses. This shoot in particular holds a special place in my heart. This was a submission for, I remember the art competitions back in the day, the photography competitions. I think I came third or fourth in that category, but it wasn't with this edited one because we weren't allowed to edit the photos. But I wanted to edit it to actually kind of make it how I wanted it. And again, mans didn't know anything about lighting, flash. Again, I just had my T3i with my built-in flash and my 18-35, and I had a vision. And we were shooting outside by my friend's apartment, and wasn't enough light. And the built-in flash was a little bit too harsh for what I wanted. And this was like about 7 o'clock in the night, mosquito biting, everybody ready to go home, but I want to get a shot that I have in my mind. I want to achieve that. So I was like, my coworker was there. I was like, you know what? Bring your car to the side and put on your high beams, and that kind of act as a fill light to some extent. And we found another light, a flashlight in the garage that kind of worked as another fill light. And I was like, all right, let me just kind of experiment, just like with the glasses again, not knowing what I'm doing, but I know I could achieve what I want using these methods. And again, using my graphic design skills to editing, I was able to get the image that I had in my mind. And again, I didn't care if people like it. I was satisfied at the end of the day that I got the image that I wanted. The next image on this slide that had like this bottom one here, she would have killed me if I actually showed the raw image, but this is a photo of my little sister. She was just coming home from work. She was pissed off because she got buffed for eating ring pop. Because we would know when she eats ring pop, she would start to get like a black thing on her lip or some kind of thing. And my mom had buffed her, so she was upset. And she was just reaching into the pot to take out food, and I was like, capture this candid moment of her. And we have it big and bold in the house just to taunt her and irritate her. But it's like literally one of my favorite pictures in the beginning. Again, me experimented. Next slide.
You can watch this whole day.
So kind of taking it back again to 2012, around this time, 2013, sorry, I had started my degree at CUST, my journalism and public relations degree. Why did I do a degree in journalism and public relations? That was plan B. CUST in Tobago wasn't offering the graphic design program, and I didn't want to come to Trinidad back and forth all the time. I was like, you know what, I work in incomes. Journalism is the closest thing. I'm doing this photography thing. Let me see what could happen or come out of this thing. So I started this program, and because I had access to some of the courses that we were doing to like events and all these kind of things, plus with work, I got access to shoot a lot of events as well too. That being, so like the Tobago Heritage, Tobago Carnival, and even though I was shooting for work, there were still images that I was still kind of capturing because I like shooting people. And we could go back to the last slide. Look, the model in the back right there. Yes. No, not ring pop, but top, the first one on top. Another one of my friends and them that I put through torture. But anyways, you could go back to the thing. Yeah. So because I had access to some of these events, I started shooting. I generally like shooting people, and this is an opportunity to add color into my work and kind of get away from the black and white a little bit. So these first three, as I said, were from the Tobago Heritage. The one at the bottom, the first one at the bottom, was a moment from Tobago Carnival. And around this time, I was kind of starting to define what is my aesthetic as a photographer. And it was just generally like shooting people and like shooting candid moments. And it was like literally my eyes, what I saw, and a moment in time just freezing. And that is kind of like how I had defined my aesthetic at that time. The other images, this I think was like a pivotal moment in not just my photography career, but just me as a professional. At CUST, myself and 3 other students were selected to represent Trinidad and Tobago at a conference for young journalists in Glasgow, Scotland in 2014. And at this ceremony that they were going to announce this, initially I wasn't selected to go, but I had one of my lecturers, Ms. Jofield, who had really truly believed in what I was doing. She really pushed and told them, I was like, hey, well, I can't be sending everybody from Trinidad and not send a representative from Tobago. So at the ceremony, because this was also the ceremony for the Queen's Baton Relay, the arrival of the baton, they made the announcement to all the other candidates that were selected, and to my surprise, they called my name. And that was like a whole moment again, but you know me, I want to retreat. I don't like that attention and all these kind of things. But in addition to that, they really had like the work that I was doing in the photography space, the coverage, that they asked if I wanted to be one of the volunteer photographers to cover the battle relay for that year, along with the official photographer. So these 3 were 3 of my favorite from the coverage. The first one, the last one at the top, this was the Tobago leg, and the others were the Trinidad leg. And these will forever have a special place in my heart. This one in particular, just based on the faces and everything, again, I was sitting in the backseat of everything that was happening, where it's only now I'm able to appreciate those moments and how big, especially, I was able to get those kind of opportunities when I had just started. Next slide. So as the photography career started to just go up, again, me not having no specific end goal, things were just going. I was just going. Eventually, people started to take note because I was working in corporate space. From that graphic design stuff, people was asking, "Oh, you do photography as well too? We have this project that's coming up. If you want to do some portraits," which kind of granted this opportunity to shoot. Again, I didn't know it was going on Express, the women's cover. I know I was just doing some press photos for these politicians as part of the campaign or whatever. And lo and behold, a Sunday, I think it was a Sunday or whatever they dropped, just going through the papers, I was like, there's on my photo. And again, I was like, cool, fold back up that papers and put it aside, not celebrating that win. Next year, same opportunity came out in the papers, but I knew this one, the one in the middle was coming out. Again, saw it in the papers, cool, fold up the papers, put it to the side. The last image, I think this was the last stint as photojournalist Terrell. It was hilarious because this was when Watson Duke was attempting to swim from Tobago to Trinidad. And I got contracted by Tobago News, and I think this was the last year that they was in operation to cover the event. And this was a special moment, not because of he was trying to swim, but this was a collaborative piece between another close friend of mine, the same model who had the African wrap in the picture I was talking about. She was also an editor and writer who did the article as well too. So at that time I was building my community of friends and creative professionals, so we had our own little inner circle. And yeah, that was the end of photojournalist Terrell. But at that time I was like, you know, I miss shooting people. I kind of want to get back to shooting portraits and being a creative again. When I get a chance to the next slide. So through Cover Blue, I was like, let me open up a photography side of the company. What could happen? And the same clients where I was building identities for, I decided to be like, hey, if you want to do portraits, offer that services as well too. In addition to that, just again experimenting. I think image 2, big up Deandra. Image 2 and the third one at the bottom were just like personal stuff of mine, but everything else were commissioned jobs by other creative professionals, fashion brands, and this was, at this point I had a better understanding of how to use lighting and flash and all these kind of things. And I think this was me, as I like to say, in a prime as a photographer, and it kind of defined today, if I'm to start back photography, what I want to do, and this type of stuff that I want to do is strictly focusing on portraits. But at this point, again, reaching my prime as a photographer, all the success I was having, work being published in the papers, building this network, you think a right-minded person would just kind of follow that wave and just keep it going? Nah. Next slide. So as you can tell, the sacred timeline started to fade. I was out of touch with that artist side. Graphic design started to kind of decline and fade as well too, because my design work started to get, for lack of a better word, clinical, and it lacked any kind of emotion because, again, I was out of touch with that artist. And but photography was going. It was just going. And at that point, this is when I started to kind of fully understand me as an individual as well too, where how my mental health and my creativity were intertwined. And from this point on out, it was pretty much a bit like scary for me, because I had all these people telling me, oh, your work's so amazing, you're doing so good, I have this opportunity. Things was just coming, and to me, I was just kind of retreating into myself, retreating from everything, and my body started to shut down. I started to feel all the physical ramifications of everything, and everything started to just kind of, you know, like with the check engine lights where all the things that started to come on, that is exactly what was happening with me. Identity crisis was the main thing, where the graphic designer was a different individual. The artist was a different individual. The photographer was a different individual, all having a different aesthetic. Yes, the artist and the photographer had similar interests, but it was completely different from everything. And the graphic designer was the perfectionist. That is when I started to develop my perfectionist tendencies. He was very clean cut, nothing miss. Like friends here could tell you, like it didn't matter the project. It could be a simple thing. I would just go above and beyond for no reason. And again, not creating, just doing and just doing the work, and not having any kind of emotional love for what I was doing. At this point, I hated. Friends could attest to that. I used to say, I hate being a graphic designer. I hate being a photographer. I don't want to be a creative anymore because it was overwhelming. And that's when my mental health started to decline. And in 2020, pandemic, I got admitted into the accident and emergency in May of 2020 for a serious panic attack. Just 11 o'clock at night, this was under curfew. Sitting watching TV, normal, minding my business, I started to feel my heart palpitating. It started racing. But I knew a few months ago before the pandemic had started, my uncle had gotten a heart attack. And I started to think about it. Am I having a heart attack? And quickly rushed up to the hospital. Long story short, got referred to the mental health clinic, and the psychiatrist had diagnosed me with general anxiety disorder. I was like, cool, we have a name to this thing here now. And at that point, I was still dealing with the identity crisis because at that time, my career was my identity. That was the main thing for me. If I didn't have that, I didn't know who I was outside of work. And a few months later, after that panic attack happened and I got that diagnosis, I was like, yeah, how do I treat with this? Because they had also prescribed antidepressants to me. And those were the worst 4 days of my life being on that medication. And after that 4th day, I was like, I don't want to do this. Let me try another option. And that's what led me to therapy. And I started therapy, and for the first year of therapy, it was, and this was something pointed out by my therapist, she was like, you realize most of our sessions is just centered around work. I feel like you're deflecting on certain things, or we're not getting to the root cause of why you're having this identity crisis, or you're having all this anxiety. And to this day, I've been in therapy for the last 4 years. And at that point, I was like, yeah. And she was like, you ready to do the real work now? I was like, cool. Let me start digging deeper into what is causing the identity crisis? What is causing the stress? What is causing the anxiety? What is causing the imposter syndrome? Because when we were discussing work, it's not that I didn't value the work that I was putting out. Because of my approach to how I did work, when I had mentioned earlier about ignorance is bliss, most of my work is experimental. And even though I had the training as a photographer, if you ask me about anything about aperture or like certain things or technical stuff, don't ask me in person. I wouldn't be able to answer on the spot. But if you give me the camera, I know what to do in that moment. And I used to kind of retreat because in my mind, and again, being pointed out from my therapist, I think very black and white. And I believe that as a professional photographer and people who I was around at the time, I had to know these things off the fly. And I was going into spaces. That's like when I met Yol. And I was a little bit nervous because it's like, I could be around people like this or be in spaces like this. Because in my mind, I knew this is what it meant to be a photographer. And as a graphic designer, I'm a self-taught graphic designer, again. Operating, I know I didn't have that foundation to speak on certain things as a designer in the early part of my career, but I was in spaces that not the average person just starting was in. So I used to retreat because I didn't feel like as if I belong in those spaces. So I knew the work was good, but I didn't feel I had the right credential to speak on certain things or be in certain spaces. And again, I wanted to hide. So again, with therapy, we got to the root cause of all these things, but see the last sticky note on top, grief? That was the one I think that broke me. I didn't expect it to, well, I did expect it, but for a few months after I started therapy this was a year and a half into it, I lost somebody special to me, my grandmom, but I'll get back to that in a bit. Next slide. Mr. Burnout happened. Even during therapy, with everything that was happening, my body just completely shut down.
Was it hard for you to admit you needed therapy? And then what was the process between realizing you had an issue and then finding a therapist?
With that, it wasn't hard because it's something I wanted to do, but I didn't have a reason to, or think I had a reason to start therapy at that moment. I knew the therapist that I wanted to go to because she works primarily with other creatives and was a referral I had gotten from a friend. And I had the contact and everything, and I know at that moment, after I realized the antidepressants wasn't working, I wanted to try, this was the plan B, and sent the email and just stuck with it. Because again, I got to that point where it's like, we can't be doing this all the time. It had to stop. It had to stop. So it wasn't a difficult decision to make for me to start therapy. So yeah, Mr. Burnout happened. And next slide. With all three identities, the graphic artist, the artist, and the photographer, I pulled the plug on the photographer. I pulled the plug on the artist. I didn't want to have anything to do with photography. I didn't want to be creative. I couldn't stop being the graphic designer because Mr. Man was paying the bills. The signal weak, but he still had to kind of keep going because bills had to pay, man's had to eat. And this period, this would have been 2019, the burnout started to show itself, but I didn't know it was burnout with the health issues. Because prior to the anxiety diagnosis in I think it was 2018 or 2017, because of the stress and the amount of pressure I was putting on myself, I'd also developed high blood pressure. So I had those physical stress issues as well too happening, but again, not knowing where they were stemming from. And at this point, yeah, I didn't want to have anything to do with photography. Like friends would tell you, I hated being a photographer. I didn't want to do this again. Graphic design, now self, friends, Richard, would send jobs my way, and I was like, yeah, friend, I can't do this. Send it to somebody else. I really not in the mood to deal with this. I was just doing the bare minimum at the day job, and that was it. I wasn't working on any personal project. I didn't want to. When that laptop closed on at 4, don't tell me about being a creative. And
were you so you kind of shut down the creative side? Did
yeah.
you pick up anything else to compensate for not being creative, or you just kind of went into that kind of?
Yeah, I just kind of went into hermit mode. And thankfully at this time when this had happened, it was the pandemic. So I had no choice but to go slow and kind of deal with all the feelings and everything head on with therapy as well as personal work. And around that same time, coming back to grief, my grandmom had also died, and that period was like a very low period for me because she pretty much was like my rock, my anchor, my number one cheerleader. And through therapy, I was surprised at myself, but I know I was doing the work where I was able to reach the acceptance stage of grief much faster than I thought, because that was like one of my biggest fears, was losing her. And allow myself the grace to take the time off, deal with it, feel all the feels, and eventually I'm at a point where like other family members, they were shocked at me, where now if we have to go back to our grave, I'm making jokes when I go in there normal, and I've accepted it. But yeah, next slide. But yeah, I had to use this period. I'm still in this kind of go slow period where even though I wasn't being a creative, I was saying it, and I was saying it not understanding the feelings of why I hated each of them. And I had to explain this in therapy, why I hated photography. She was like, why I hate it? What you don't like about it? Is it something in particular you want to do instead of this? So it was really doing that inner work that I was kind of able to how to put it? Reignite that flame again. And slowly start being a creative again, because I was able to understand why I hated design. I don't hate design. The things that I was doing at that time, I hated doing those things, or didn't like it, didn't agree with me. And again, that inner critic I was talking about, today I could look at him as not necessarily my inner critic, but it was like my inner child screaming out like, bro, yeah, we had to redirect. This not working for you. We had to kind of get back to day one on that step and get back on track of the things that you generally love doing.
So is it that like you lost the sense of play and the fun of it?
Yes.
And it's like you got into just serving people and taking instruction and just doing all that robotic.
Yeah, it was literally on autopilot.
Yeah, you lose your soul basically.
And I lose touch, and basically that inner child was the artist on that timeline. That is that person. And he wasn't creating for the love of it anymore. It was, as I said, literally to serve clients and all these kind of things. And eventually through the work with therapy and doing some work, some alignment started to happen, where today I'm comfortable saying that all those identities could exist in one person, the artist, and I could tap into those spaces when needed. I haven't tapped into them as yet, but I've done the work, I'm still doing the work, that I could see they aren't separate persons anymore, and I don't have to view them as different entities anymore. So it's less of a me restarting, but just kind of cleaning up house and putting things together. So it's definitely sticking with therapy, where therapy for the first 2 years, it was bi-weekly. Eventually third year, it started to go once or twice every month. And now to this date is, I'm happy to say, where it's like when needed. And one of the things I always say to myself every single day is, bro, give yourself some grace. You're starting to feel overwhelmed, figure out why you're feeling overwhelmed in this moment, work on that, pause, give yourself some grace. That moment as well too, get a dog. If you know me, you know I love my dog. When I have a bigger space, because even with the 5, we didn't get 5 the day when I adopted my dog, we actually adopted 3. One for my dad, one for my sister, and one for myself. You'll see him later down in a slide. But these were just like, and well, the designer's presentation is kind of like my journal, my sketchbook, where these were things I would just like have at my desk, sticky notes I would have at my desk to just kind of as prompts, daily prompts for myself, or words of affirmation. Next slide. So this shoot, I chose two shoots that I never really publicly shared or talked about. I think I posted them on Instagram, but I never shared them. These three images in particular. Now, in January of 2021, one of my good friends, Mikey, Isolate Media, amazing model, cinematographer, photographer, all around creative as well too. He was like, he knew the stress I was going through. He was also dealing with some things, and he was like, you wanna go by the studio and shoot? And he worked with some pieces, and we just spent like a good 4 or 5 hours just shooting. This was like one of the last things that we shot. And I was shooting with no kind of concept or any kind of thing. We were just literally going with the flow or where the shoot went. Got back, edited them, how I felt. I was just going based on feelings. I'm not thinking too much on it, and I was just posting it on Instagram as I do. And this was actually the first shoot after doing the work and kind of like me dipping back my toe into the water of being a creative again. That happened, follow the timeline, January of 2021. Posted this on Instagram, and I was like, cool, let me look for a cool caption or something aesthetically pleasing to see what this shoot is about. And I had titled this Santa Muerte. And because of the skulls and everything, and death was so around us at the time because of the pandemic, just find a cool cheesy quote on Google and just slap that. With no any kind of clear explanation of what the shoot meant or any kind of thing. Fast forward to July 2021, that was the same year that my grandmom died. And a few months later, his mom died. So it was a heavy period, but again, I wasn't taking the shoot into consideration. It was just something that I had posted on Instagram, and it stayed there. It wasn't until, I think it was in November or December that year, I was just kind of pulling together some stuff to put on my website. And I was just going through the shoots again. And because I know I had done some work in therapy, I looked at the shoot. I was like, why these three in particular standing out to me? Took some time, looked at the image, went and lied down, came back, looked at the image again too. Why these three in particular just jumping out at me? And took some time, explored that, and why I had like this when, this may be a little sad story, but the month prior to my grandmom dying, she died in July, the month of June, you know what we would call that transition period where people will be transitioning, but death was the furthest thing from our minds for her. And it was there because of the pandemic and deaths, and then we had some previous deaths in the family the year prior. So it was something there, but you didn't know that it was coming. Eventually, as it got closer to July date, death started to look us in the eye. The day before she died, she was at home around everybody, just literally gasping. And me watching that moment played out, thankfully today I'm not falling apart thinking about it anymore. It's still sad, but it was literally watching us in our eyes. And that's our second image. But we still didn't know this was it. And eventually it happened, as I said before, went through the whole grieving process. And that entire process, plus allowing myself to grieve and feel all the things I was feeling, it gave me a very strange outlook on death, where it isn't necessarily something ugly. It provided an opportunity, even with the grief, for me to do some more work again. And there was just like a glimmer in his eyes, where there's a glimmer of hope on the end, and it was peace for her, for what she was going through. And that is how I viewed death in that moment. And this is why these 3 images in particular kind of represent that moment that I was experiencing with her, with the first 2 being the transition period and then death after. These 3 images held a special place in my heart. And I was telling Mikey about it, and he was like, Dan, I didn't even realize all of that. But now, like the next set of images I'm gonna show, I've started revisiting some work that I've done that I've just generally did, not thinking anything about it. And it's bringing context to certain things I've done, like, hey, maybe that artist wasn't necessarily dead, but unconsciously he was still kind of working, and there's no way I could have not been a creative, if that makes sense. So even if I wasn't trying it was still showing up in some ways, to some extent. Mm-hmm.
Do you think that sometimes our art kind of speak to us when we don't even have the words yet? I've done stuff where it's like, I will do it, and then it's like, why did I do that?
Mm-hmm.
And then it speaks back to you and tells you what, so you kind of get a translation of what's actually been happening deep down inside yourself.
Yeah, I agree. And like for me, even when I said like I was calling myself an artist, again, in my mind, knew what an artist was. I didn't necessarily have the credential, and I didn't feel like I needed to call myself an artist. But I didn't realize how personal the work that I was creating, both graphic design and photography, the stuff that I was doing for me, how much it was like a visual representation of my personal feelings. It was like my visual journal to some extent. And I kind of give myself like grace, and maybe I'm an artist to some extent. And maybe embracing that side, or embracing that inner child again, was and is, and I can actually attest to that, is something I personally needed to do to just kind of help shape me as a creative professional, so better understand my identity as a creative. Next. So that following year, same Mikey, we did another shoot. Another one of our sessions where we went to the studio and we were just shooting stuff again. But with this one, I knew coming into this, I wanted to take a piece of my journal where I wanted to visually create what that identity crisis felt like, what that overthinking process felt like, how I was feeling, where my head was just going, pulling that tug, like in the first one, where it was just like a tug between a graphic designer, that tug between a photographer. Mm-hmm.
Was it intentional for it to look like a low back
Not necessarily, it was just in the moment of stuff, but again, art is open for interpretation, so.
Like an abstract, like a German shepherd with its mouth open.
Interesting.
Because the chains looks like teeth.
Oh, I've not seen it. Thank you, Kwan. Naomi. But yeah, I literally use this was the first shoot, and I think if I start back doing portrait work or professional photography, I want to create for me and do more personal stuff like this, where it's for me. If I decide I want to do an exhibition or something sometime, I would do it. But I'm at a point where I could say, right now, I don't necessarily want to get back into photography, shooting for clients or doing that client work, but use this as a space to create for me, for now. We'll get to that space just now. But yeah, this was the shoot, basically visualizing that identity crisis, overthinking, anxiety, in that moment. Next slide. So even with the time that I wasn't shooting, I was shooting, whether I didn't like it or not. My camera eventually, after the teacher, I got a Canon 80D, but that got damaged in 2020. So to this day, I don't have a DSLR, but I still kind of wanted to still do photography to some extent and just kind of focus on just creating these little cool visuals to Instagram or my own personal wallpapers. So I had started a personal photo series for myself. It's not something I spoke about online, but in 2016, those two in the middle, I started this photo thing from above what was the title of it? I can't remember. But it's like every time I fly, I wanted to capture an image, a very cool artistic image or something. And that second image was me leaving JFK just as it was about to snow, and captured this. I have an obsession with grids, as you can see how that ties back into my personal branding later on. And that third image was me leaving, I think it was a early morning flight from Atlanta, headed back to New York. And I didn't know what I was doing. I was just taking out my camera. I was shooting on my iPhone 6 at the time. And I was just like creating these things, not thinking too much into them. It was just cool for Instagram. But last year, I was like, you know what, let me make this into a thing for me or Instagram. I would just kind of post. And this first image was me on a return flight from Tobago, shot on my iPhone 12, just passing Port of Spain. And the last one was headed from Tobago to Trinidad and just kind of capturing the clouds. Simple images, but I kind of started by doing this series to just kind of keep the flame alive. As small as it is, it was still kind of bringing some kind of joy to me personally. And I didn't care that I was doing anything. I didn't have no end goal, or I need to run out of an exhibition with this thing. It was just something that was just making me happy in the moment, and I stuck with it. Next image. These three were again from not the same series, but again from mobile photography. This one was me, first time going into Times Square. Worst time to do it at lunchtime, so it was just jam-packed. But again, with these photo things I was doing, series I was doing on my phone, I wanted to shoot and edit everything directly from my iPhone. So I think with this time I was using this app called Visco, and this was shot again on my iPhone 6. This one in the middle, I got trapped in the rain at the parlor home. I shot this on my iPhone 7. Again, another moment I wanted to keep. Cool other wallpaper. Me being very analytical, I was like, I wish it had somebody standing with an umbrella in that open side, but I was like, you know what? Don't stress it. It's a cool picture, just leave it as is. And this one, I actually shot this last week, Saturday, on the Art Gallery Hub. And I was like, yeah, I needed one more image to add to this moody collection. And this was just some maxis lining up against the rain. And I was like, yeah, like, you know what? I could print these and just like put them up in my apartment. But again, it was me tapping back into that person and just having fun with it and not thinking too much about an end goal or it being perfect or being technically right or all these kind of things. And just using it as an artist, or this was my canvas to create. So staying in this flow state that I'm in now, a few months ago, I started to get more in touch with the artists. And thankfully, I have some amazing friends, Naomi, one of them being somebody who kind of inspired me to kind of pick back up that pencil, because as a child, every night before I go and sleep, I had to draw or sketch on everything. But that wasn't something I shared with the world. That was just for me to make me happy again. And I was like, art, visual arts, we have a love-hate relationship, because to this date, I'm proud of it. Let me say I'm proud of it, but I actually got a 3 in visual arts in high school. No fault of mine. I'm not forgetting it. But that moment, I didn't want to like draw or paint all these kind of things, because again, to be an artist or to a visual artist, you had to be a certain level. In my mind, there was just these visors saying you had to be at this level to do all these kind of things. So a few months ago, I was like, you know what? I feel like drawing and sketching and doodling again. I primarily just like doodling and sketching. And I was like, let me start experimenting and drawing different things. For whatever reason, I had this obsession with peregrinades and those Moko peregrinades. And I just started drawing a set of them. This would have been, one month in August, July, ending of June. I just drawing. And to this day, this was when I did a quick sketch I did in commemoration of World Steel Pan Day. And again, not thinking about an end goal or it being perfect or doing something with it. Again, it was just me tapping back into a state where I was creating and creating for me again. Of course, Bossman Men had to be in the shot when I was trying to take a thing, and I was like, you know what? Let me bring it to presentation without bringing it to presentation. And yeah, this was me. When it comes to drawing and visual arts, there's something I have later on in the presentation, but I'm always of the mindset of creatives having something for themselves that is personal for themselves that they don't necessarily have to create for consumption, whether it be public consumption, but it's something that just makes them happy. And drawing and sketching is to me. It would show up in other ways through my graphic design projects, but like with these, this is just to me. Things I want to put up in my apartment, things I just want to have fun, again, making me happy again, and kind of reigniting that flame as a creative. Again, next slide. So, a nice day. So I know you all saw the A.N.D. That was me, or now here, kind of soft launching something that I hope to turn into a lifestyle brand one day. But again, giving myself grace and kind of keeping it for me for now. But this is a tribute to my grandmom, but it's also my happy place, my space to create without any client work, a space to create and experiment with any art form that I choose. I want to experiment or be curious with at a particular time. And it's literally that front step that I spoke about earlier where I was creating our glasses. That is that space for me, since I'm no longer home again. And it's almost kind of like a mindset at this stage where what does a nice day mean to me? It's the perfect intersection between art and design, where I could have those two personalities playing again, and they could actually get along, where I could create things or start doing personal design projects that I personally enjoy. Again, not worrying about having an end goal. The end goal is secondary at this stage. And I've started creating things for a nice day, given to friends. I wear them. Next slide. So these were just like the merch side of the brand, where I wanted to create or draw patriotic things without being on the nose patriotic brand, and just kind of create cool graphic tees that I personally want to wear. Jabari. It will come just now. Wait. But no. We got talk. But no, it was literally these prints. I started, again, doing that work over the last few years, tapping into what I like about graphic design and the things that I enjoy. And I really love apparel design. And that's kind of like the headspace for personal projects I'm kind of tapping into, where I'm exploring this like different prints, instead of like actually buying graphic tees. Let me make my own graphic tees. And still keep things a little patriotic. I just call this one the Lyman Squad. With no intention of making them into a collection, but some advice from a friend. He was like, yeah, if you decide to take this into a brand, structure stuff like a collection that could kind of help your thought process and all these kind of things. But yeah, these were just like the merch side of things that I wanted to create. And this was almost kind of like exhibition in a while, where this was like my first time creating design work in years that I personally like, and it goes back to answering your question, like actually seeing them and seeing people wear them. And even like with my earlier work, there was a t-shirt that I posted with the Ibis print, that Ibis camo. That was one that I was extremely proud of, because it came from an honest place. It was something that I loved doing. It was an idea that I had in my mind for years, and having the opportunity to do it on such a large scale on a national level, that put a smile on my face, and I was like, yeah, Terrell boy, you do the thing, buddy. But yeah, that is what this kind of brought back, that love for design again. And I am personally excited to see what else I create again later down the road, but that love is back again for design. So this was a print that I created off the whim. Something I always say, and I had mentioned it previously in terms of creatives having something for themselves. And throughout this whole talk, I'm talking about things that make me happy. I'm doing this to make me happy. And it's something I always say, be a licorice artist. Again, not everything needs to be for consumption. If you, Chad, Sarita, Naomi, Sudisha, your outward facing brand as a graphic designer, photographer, you know you are known for commercial, portraits, all these kind of things. That's your outward facing brand. But maybe you just like shooting animals or dogs, or you like painting. From my own experience, I quickly realized you don't have to put everything on the front line. That could just be your own thing. You being licorice and keeping that for you to make you as a creative happy. Because sometimes we pour a lot into our outward facing brands. And again, from my experience, we forget to work on your own personal brand. And most of the times, that outward facing brand, your verbal language would be we. But most of the time, it's just you being the admin, the photographer, all the things. If you, the individual, ain't good in that moment, that is it. And that is something to this day I keep in my mind. I was like, Terrell, you cannot show up for other people if you ain't good. And yes, I upset a few clients of mine who would have been with me when I tell them I'm not doing this or I'm not taking any jobs or anything, but I had to do it because I wasn't going into this project and wasting your money creating something that was mediocre. And I said, you know what, moving forward from 2021 to this date, still in a go slow state, but I am only doing the things that brings me joy, it's making me happy, and that's the mindset I'm in for now. I have to make sure that I am good and get back to a place where I can be good for other people at the end of the day. So again, be a licorice artist. That is a reminder. Be greedy. Don't feel bad if you're not sharing certain things with the world. That is for you as an individual, to make you as a creative, you the artist, happy at the end of the day. Next slide. And yeah, again, my name is Terrell George, and I am a constant work in progress. And I'm learning to accept that all these things, artist, photographer, art director, graphic designer, content creator, bartender, because I actually did a bartending course because I love bartending and mixology. But again, licorice, that is my thing. I'm not sharing that with nobody. But again, I'm proud to say that I am a work in progress. I'm not entirely there as yet. I don't know if I'll entirely be there, but I'm at a place where mentally I feel comfortable to be in spaces like this and talk about my own personal journey. Because there may be other people experiencing the same thing, but they feel they have to show up in a certain way or have all the credentials to be in certain spaces when you don't. And thankfully I have a network and support system of friends who inspire me every single day, who constantly show up as themselves. And if they're doing it, why can't I? And yeah, that's me.
I always have questions. Talk a little bit about community tonight, because you talk about, you know, your friends who come and be your muse, your friends who's giving you advice on the t-shirt collection, your other friends telling you about doing art. I mean, so it sounds as though you have that real strong support community of people. Talk a little bit about that and how it.
Sure.
Yeah.
So most of my friends, thankfully, close friends, are creatives in some form. Photographers, videographers, models, stylists, graphic designers. Some started off as co-workers, some started off as classmates, and I am, and still to some extent, the planner. That kind of planner in the group who always organizing, like we're gonna align, do something kind of thing. And over the years, we would have kind of created our relationship amongst ourselves where we're friends first and co-workers after. And I wouldn't be where I am at today without them, especially with the photography, Deandra. You know which time I got clung here?
You still didn't get tissue.
But nah, like, even with her, I'm not a model, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that. And it's about you in this moment now. But I was like, I see something in you, even with like other friends and them, I want to shoot. I just want to shoot. I need some muses to shoot, and I have a vision in my head. And they're like, all right, I can take some embarrassing pictures with them and just kind of clone them with it. But I was like, you know, let me balance it off with some cool aesthetically pleasing stuff. And they kind of really helped build that portfolio for me in the beginning. And kind of really the ones also pushing me and telling me, Terrell, you work good, put it out there. Even with this talk, or even Mr. Jabari in the back for the last 2 years who was asking me to come on this podcast. We finally did it, but again, I didn't want to do these things because I didn't feel as if I had the qualifications or the credentials to be in spaces to talk about these things again. And they really and truly push and kind of motivate me, and like seeing them posting stuff every single day, Naomi showing up with her TikToks and just be naturally Naomi. Brand that. But just like seeing everybody show up as themselves, and it's like, don't let it waste a breath or waste a time. You had to show up for yourself as well too, and kind of believe in yourself too. And even through when I lost my grandmom, like they were there for me. And people always see us moving in certain spaces and think, oh, they're very cliquish. But no, this is friends who have become family at this point. And we have a deeper understanding of each other that we, outside of just being friends, when it comes to the work, we could tap into this little community that we have and past jobs. If I'm not feeling to do a graphic design thing, Sidisha, wherefore? Take this. Videography, photography, Phil, you want to do this thing, Naomi, you want to do this thing. And we have a trust system because especially when it comes to each of our individual brands, we don't play. And we want to be able to trust people to, if we can't do something, this person have your back trying to do a micromanager or any kind of thing. And yeah, from since 2012, just building that network or that community, that ecosystem. And it continues to grow at different stages of our lives. Some of us who would have started off doing one thing, doing something completely different. Some of us who are some top models now, I'm not going to call names. But it's good to see everybody growing, but we're still constantly taking time to check in with each and every one of us at different points of our lives. Life. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Why did you think that you would meet different people,
Mm-hmm.
photographer, artist, and videographers?
At that time, I think I was just mentally wired like that. Because aside from outside of career, there were other personal things I was dealing with, the trauma and everything, that had kind of shaped me to think very black and white. And in my mind at the time, a graphic designer was completely different from a photographer, where the photographer, Terrell, was very expressive with his work. It was very vibrant. I didn't have to worry about clean lines or anything, whereas the graphic designer, that person evolved into somebody who I was afraid of. That work was very clinical, it was very clean cut, strategic, and everything had to be perfect. I didn't need to be messy, and even people who would have worked with Sidisha and Naomi.
So walk around like a serious face, in a serious
Yeah, that person was a very completely different individual.
than eyebrows.
It was dumb. And I had to be like that because the additional pressure of being a graphic designer, especially working in the public sector, a lot of people don't have respect for you. They see you as a graphic designer, even outside of the public sector. And I had to show up and show out in those spaces to gain that respect. And that also developed that persona of being very uptight, being a perfectionist, closed up, being very serious to be in certain spaces, to speak to directors or speak to CEOs, all these kind of things, and not necessarily have them view me as just the graphics man who could do something quick. And that had helped to some extent to get me where I'm at today because of my work ethic. But now I could pull from that personality and tap into that space without necessarily being that perfectionist. Because to this day, I love the imperfections. Give me everything that is imperfect, I enjoy that now. That is what the artist like. But that person was very clinical. But when I picked up that camera, I tapped back into that inner child a bit and was a little bit more expressive. My friends know me as a clown, a big clown. And that was very light-hearted. That didn't involve any kind of design work. And that was kind of really something I use in therapy. They threw me to some extent. But he and all, when he got to a stage in his career, when he was in his so-called prime, started to get a little bit trigger happy and was doing things that I don't want to say I wasn't necessarily supposed to be doing, but I started doing engagement shoots, wedding things that I had no business doing or know how to do, but because, you know, you're at the same business, you have this brand and you have to start building on marketing and expanding the business because the field was now so saturated at this time. Everybody's a photographer, everybody's a graphic designer, how are you going to stand out? And you had to expand and do certain services, things that you didn't want to do because the business side of being a creative, bills had to pay, things had to get done. So you have to end up doing things that you didn't like. And he was kind of becoming very serious, but thankfully when I put that plug in, it didn't get to the stage that graphic design got. So I would say the artist and the photographer are twins to some extent. But yeah, the artist and photographer and then the graphic designer, he was...
Not you, actually.
It wasn't me, because it was void of any kind of emotions, because even to this day, I have to emotionally detach from my work, not to deal with just in order to deal with feedback from people who didn't have no business talking about things that they didn't know about. And be able to sit in rooms and not necessarily crack, because you know the minute that they see the graphic designer crack or you start to have an attitude, that is it for me. They're going to talk about somebody, going to talk about that. So that person had to be very cold, stoic, and void of anything.
We are from a different humanities.
Yeah.
But I think deep down, all we are artists. Like that child that was making glasses, that's the real you.
Yeah.
And then so we become different people, and then we can stand the outside of that and support that a totally different person who I truly am. So this is still like three different humans.
Yeah. And I mean, I still, again, to this day, tap back into some of that personality, because you have to kind of have that persona, especially working in the public sector, sorry. Yeah, back gotta be broad. To deal with some of the day-to-day things with that, and even just outside of that client work, where it's not an attack on you as a person. And what I've realized in this space, they value your work ethic more than your talent. And you always have to be mindful of that. So even in business meetings or certain things, you'll still get a bit of that cool person, but not as much as before. So that guard going up when needed at that point. I hope that answer your question too. Yeah, basically.
So it's a key separation of concerns that allows you to actually do these different tasks.
Yeah. Yeah, and in therapy, we always use analogies, and as you can see in the presentation, that's generally like how I view everything. And even in my logo, this logo is a funny thing. It wasn't necessarily supposed to be mine at the beginning. This was an option I had presented to, I don't know if you all know Kyle Walcott. He was my first ever client I ever designed a logo for. And this was one of the options where instead of the T, it had actually make a K. And that was the one I was gunning for him to take, but he didn't take it. And I was like, I really like this concept. I can take it and keep it for me. And this was kind of like my logo. And over the years, it gained further meaning because it was inspired by the autofocus points on a camera. And just like you did, where my focus shifts from different things. Right now it's on the T, which is focusing on me and being a Krish. But again, even with the grids, it goes back to that graphic design person who is very clinical, who likes structure, who likes order. Even in my mind, as I explained to my therapist, like how I visualize everything in my life, it's like different check boxes or filing systems. And that's how I view everything. So this is what that logo means to me. I'm able to give it more meaning now as I'm getting more in tune with myself. And even conversations with my psychiatrist when I have to check in on the medical side of things. Because of how I think and I approach certain things, somebody had pinpointed to me, do you have ADHD or underlying autism as well, or even OCD? Because I do know in one side I had a question mark next to OCD. I'm still in the process of figuring that one out because I may have underlying OCD, and that kind of goes back to the control of wanting to have things a particular way as a graphic designer. Things will have to be perfect. And even like my whole outlook and narrative on being a creative, I had to kind of shift that narrative to fit me and kind of use that steering wheel when I had lost control of it to get back or regain some sense of control that I could just kind of ground myself. So that's why I said I'm a work in progress. I still have a lot more work to do, but generally I'm at a place in life where I feel that alignment happening that I could start creating work again from an honest place.
Go for it.
Well, I know you since 2008.
Mm-hmm.
So the same high school, we went to the same college. How do you feel, because you're here in Trinidad now, working, how do you feel like that perspective makes you stand out? If you're just talking about standing out and what you bring. How do you feel like coming from Tobago and getting into the public sector in Tobago? You were very involved with like heritage and a lot of stuff like that. How do you feel like that gives you a different edge, not as a Trinidad and
Yeah, as well, you know, I never really cared about like status or popularity or attention or any kind of thing. So I never really cared to stand out, but that was also a form of control because like even in my graphic design business, I work strictly on referrals. And people would often ask, I think Jabari had asked in the presentation, podcast at the time, like, how do I get clients on all these kind of things if I don't put out my work or do any kind of marketing? That was also me kind of controlling who I wanted to work with. And because of my work ethic, thanks again to that perfectionist, I was able to get kind of referrals and kind of just have recurring jobs and everything happening. And I was content with that. Bills were being paid, I was happy. So I didn't really care about competition per se. But now, when you start to discuss the business side of things, you really have to take stock of your own personal brand and how you're showing up now, especially in a time like where a lot of photographers or graphic designers are now content creators on TikTok and showing a different side of themselves. And even just in our culture, networking, getting into certain spaces, certain jobs is who you know. So you have to kind of start putting yourself out there, and even if you don't like it. And I realized since moving to Trinidad, it's no longer everybody I know from work anymore again. Is certain spaces you have to know this person. You can't be affiliated with the X person because feelings and all this kind of stuff. And you really and truly have to show up. But for me, I don't want to show up just because I want to get into certain spaces. If I have to do all that work, I don't want to be there. But at the same time, spaces like this, or being on the Jabari show, or these little things that have been kind of coming my way that feel right, I'm listening to that inner child again. If this feels good to me, I will do it. And yeah, slowly build a network. Thankfully, over the years, I've kind of been doing that work before moving, where a few persons know me in certain spaces, the spaces I actually want to be in, network and show up when I need to, and just keep it at bay. But for me, I don't want to be that person who is everywhere all the time.
How many more boxes to go before Tiger is complete?
I think we're staying with that 9 for now, but I think I was continually doing things that pique my interest. Some, as I said, I would share, some I won't share. But each, I would take away something and tie it back into another form and have them collaborate instead of being separate bodies. I think for now with the artist and the photographer, if I have to say I want to start doing stuff again, I definitely don't have any set goals, but I would love to do an exhibition on like some of the older stuff or even some of the stuff that I've shown. That's just like one box I want to check off, but it's not something that I have to do. But I always said, like, if I start back now, I get back another camera, I would just do it and create for me from an honest place like before again, to make me happy. And whatever comes from it, if somebody wants to buy a print, but I know for a fact that I don't want to get back into clients' work as a photographer right now. I don't know what would happen next year. Something could happen, but right now, I think that bringing in the client work coming into it, it was one of the factors that led to me unplugging it from before, because I don't want anybody controlling it or dictating like how certain things are supposed to be. I want to create, that is like my digital canvas to some extent. If an opportunity comes up where somebody who 100% trusts my vision to create for them, fine. If it happens, it happens, but it's not something that I'm inclined to do right now.
One of the stuff that makes you feel free, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, that controlling thing, it puts a stifle in on the creativity.
Yeah, I want to say not a nice day space for now and just create for me and kind of get back to that place, because as I said, I'm still in go slow. I've done the work, I have still a lot more work to do, but now as it relates to truly personal brand, I can start developing stuff that I enjoy and create a portfolio of work that feels honest and things that I could, as I said, like I could see it out in a while and be like, yeah, boy, do the thing, boy. And just have work that I could have that reaction instead of like cringing. And like even some of the stuff that I was cringing about, like now I can look back and be like, yeah, this kind of look good. I pat myself on the shoulder, kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, that is awesome. Let's, we don't have to finish, so let's finish off the kind of formal part.
Yes.
Terrell sitting now in front of everyone. Hopefully, I know you said you had to leave, but
Oh yeah.
you know, hopefully you can hang on for a few minutes and just chat. So, thank you so much. I mean, I can't imagine how hard, I mean, at least for me, to sit down there and be so open and vulnerable and talk about your journey and your mental health challenges and your grief. And I mean, it's a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, and so, I mean, I certainly appreciate your honesty and your willingness to share this with us. And I think, I mean, for me, it was quite useful. So many things you said kind of, you know, bounced around in my head. So many things you said, you know, yesterday I was listening to a podcast with a photographer called Sarah Terry, and she was talking about, she was going through, say, a divorce, a real difficult divorce and stuff, and she had looked back, she was looking back and she was taking pictures of, she was on assignment for, in a post-war kind of scenario, and she was taking pictures of people's hands and feet and things, and she was wondering, you know, why was she drawn to this? And when she was showing her one of her friends who's an artist, she's like, you know, you've been torn apart by this thing, and you know, this is your way of expressing it. So without even knowing it,
That's
she was, you know, working it out through her photography, you know. So it was interesting that you said that. And then something else is about the imposter syndrome. I mean, I think it's something that many of us, you know, I mean, really struggle with. You know, but yeah, I mean, I was at a workshop last year, and one of the photographers, he's a Rhodes Scholar, and he was talking about he has imposters, you know, so it's something that never really goes away, I don't think, you know. I think you could be
At the top of your game.
at Dan Winter's level, and you still have imposter syndrome, you know, and you're not sure what you're doing, and if it's the right way, and if people will, you know. So I think it's a constant struggle for us, but it's interesting to hear your take on it and some of these solutions. I like these solutions, and I'm glad we know what a nice day is.